700 WLW podcast. Catch Scott Sloan weekdays at 9:06 on 700 WLW.
Scott Sloan Show on the big one, 700 WLW. God or science? That is the debate that may or may not be settled tonight at the Creation Museum down in Kentucky. As you know, this thing has been on the calendar for quite some time, and it's going to be interesting, certainly, as it's not only for the participants and those few number of spectators that got tickets. I think they sold out in less than 2 minutes. But for probably millions around the world, this thing is going to be streamed on the web as well. So today on the show, ahead of the debate, I have, I tried to get someone from maybe representing the interests of the Almighty and those in the non-secular arena, but couldn't do so. But nonetheless, we have on today on the show from Tri-State Free Thinkers. He's a prominent atheist, and that is Mr. Edwin Kagin. Edward, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning to you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
I wish I had someone, maybe, I don't know if I'd call them the other side, but someone with more reasonable knowledge of the Bible than I do, but I am a Christian, I believe. Well, the thing is tonight, isn't it? I think there's with the storm that's coming, the ice storm, isn't there a little bit of irony? This thing may get canceled tonight because of a godly event?
Well, maybe and that's a framework God doesn't approve of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, we don't know about the storm yet. The thing is still on. It's put on by the Tri-State Free Thinkers and the Secular Student Alliance. David Silverman, the president of American Atheists, is flying in there, and we will have the show streaming live at the Radisson Hotel in Covington, starting at 7 p.m. The doors open at 6:30, and anybody can come in who wishes, no charge. You can learn more about American Atheists at atheist.org, and that's the commercial pretty much.
All right, so from the talking points of that, because, you were kind enough to, I know you guys were kind enough to invite me down. I don't know how many members of the media did, but I had have a prior engagement. I would have. I think it'd be interesting to sit and watch this debate among people, atheists like yourself. But nonetheless, the debate is still on tonight between Ken Ham and Bill Nye. I think the bigger view of this thing, is this just, Edwin, a PR stunt? This is kind of like debating a chicken or the egg or what shade of blue the sky is. I don't think neither side will win this debate. I don't think it's a winnable debate. I think it just will reinforce your beliefs if you're an atheist or a Christian. But in that, after that scope, would you say that is science winning the war, so to speak, on this thing these days?
There is no war. Creationism is a religious doctrine that has no place in science. It is irrelevant. It is a Bronze Age mythology of the ancient Hebrew people. And it's not a question of a clash of worlds. It's a clash of knowledge versus ignorance. And that's what we really have here. Ken Ham is with the Creation Museum, a operation in northern Kentucky that opened $27 million paid in full before they've got going. Very well done, I must say. I recommend everybody go see it because it's really a lot worse than they think. And they really just, and it's putting forth a primitive Bronze Age mythology, a creation myth, as so many other ancient civilizations did, and that's what it is. And these folks are touting this as true. It's as bizarre as saying that it's true the stork delivers babies, or the earth is flat. The Bible, by the way, does say the earth is flat. People say it doesn't, but it does. And a number of other myths. This is a mythology. I have proposed making a theme park in northern Kentucky called Omni-Myth, where you can have the story of people created out of dirt. You can have the story of a god pulling the sun across the sky in a chariot. All sorts of pre-scientific beliefs where people looked at nature and tried to explain it and could not, and so therefore they said that God did it. That's still what we have going today. If you don't agree with the fact of science, if you don't understand something, simply say God did it, and then all is well.
Edwin Kagin with the Free Thinker Society of the Tri-State. And
I'm actually National Legal Director for American Atheists.
Oh, National Legal Director. Let me write that. National Legal Director. Got it. Okay. I didn't know. I wasn't aware of the title. Okay. But here's the thing.
I'm a member of the Tri-State Free Thinkers, to be sure, but my principal business.
It's a pretty big title.
It's okay.
I think most people, Edwin, outside of this argument, obviously you're a very passionate atheist. We have very passionate Christians, as we know, and that's what should be the toxic mix tonight down in Kentucky at the Creation Museum. But I think most people, speaking for most regular people, we kind of believe in both, right? I mean, I believe that microsurgery and a pacemaker are wonderful benefits of science and the advancement of technology. But at the same time, that doesn't mean I don't pray the rosary and go to confession before I have that surgery.
Try admitting one or the other and see which one works best.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, is you're presuming that, we presume science and religion both exist. We know that. I think, though, that this makes me more open-minded than you and more of a scientist, because you have completely ruled out, it sounds like, that there is no God. You don't have empirical proof there is no God. At least I'm open-minded to the possibility that God exists.
I've never said there is no God. I've never said that.
Well, you're calling the whole thing a myth.
Well, that doesn't mean there's no God. The myth is...
Well, a myth means it's based... Wait, a myth is the same thing as a fable, isn't it? Which is just like this creation to explain things we don't know. So if God is a creation of things to explain things we don't know, then you're saying he doesn't exist.
Well, the fact that you've got a story doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. As I say, atheists don't say God does not exist. Atheists say, I do not believe there is a God. And there's a very big difference. I can't prove there is no God, no more than anyone can prove there aren't two invisible unicorns at Camp Quest, the camp I founded for children of non-believers. But don't be mistaken on that. Science is not a passionate thing at all. If creationism or the myths of Genesis, a 6-year-old world and everybody on Earth and 7 pairs of every animal in a wooden box is true, it'll be demonstrated someday. But thus far, it has not, and it cannot be. I don't see the only particular passion is that people who do not accept this nonsense of evolution are attempting to prevent the child abuse that I believe comes about when evolution is taught, or when creationism and intelligent design are taught or attempted to be taught in place of science. I consider that to be a form of child abuse. I also consider it to be dangerous to the United States as other nations, some of our enemies, are developing science and technology while we're sitting around sticking bones in the eye sockets of cave bears, metaphorically. It is ridiculous to have a Bronze Age viewpoint and 20th century technology, and no, they are not compatible.
So they can't exist. That was, I guess, the next question. Genesis and Darwin cannot coexist.
Oh, I don't think they can either. There's some people who think they can. There's some people...
I think they can.
Okay, fine. Some say, well, maybe the 6 days is not really correct. Maybe a day stands for a million years, a billion years, or whatever. And if you want to believe that, fine, but don't teach it in school. Don't pray in my school, and I won't think in your church.
Well, here's what I think, and here's the thing: is that, and I agree with you. I don't think that the religious origins of the universe, if you subscribe to that, should be taught in a biology class or a science classroom. But I think they have an important place, perhaps somewhere in the school outside of the laboratory. I'm with you. I understand there's a difference between science and religion, and at first blush, certainly in a teaching institution, a school, that, sitting there and telling me about a religious theory or theology in a science lab is contradictory at best. I think there's another place for it outside of the science lab.
Well, I'm totally in favor of teaching religion as a academic discipline. You want to teach the stories of the myths of Genesis, fine, but also let's teach the Eskimo myths that the raven created the earth and the sun, and Hindu myths and ancient Egyptian myths that Amun-Ra ejaculated the stars and the planets, that Apollo pulls a chariot across the sky, that Neptune rules the sea. You can go on and on and on. And I have a familiarity with these. I have a much greater familiarity with Christianity. I have read the Bible, which gives me a significant advantage over many people who believe in it.
Again, it's Edwin Kagin. He is the National Legal Director and a member of Tri-State Freethinkers, but National Legal Director of the Atheist.org, on the show this morning ahead of the great debate tonight between Ken Ham of the Creation Museum and Bill Nye, the science guy, and the battle royale between God and science. I will ask you this, as someone who believes both can coexist, Edwin, that how would you explain love and faith from a scientific? Because you said it isn't, and you're right. Science is not passionate at all. Much like if you watch The Big Bang Theory, the characters there aren't very passionate except about science itself. But you're saying that reason should be devoid of emotion and emotion devoid of reason. And I understand that separation between science and religion. But if that is true, and what you just told me is, then how do you explain something like love and faith?
I don't, and I don't have to. It's a phenomenon that can be explained by psychology, by the chemistry of the brain, by all sorts of things. And from the experience I've had with love, some of those experiences can be quite false. I think that what you need to understand, what your listeners need to understand, is that Ken Ham does believe that this is true, and he thinks they can coexist together, and they simply cannot. This is putting a glossing over superstition. Why don't we teach the story?
Well, yeah, you just glossed, but yet you just glossed over an important facet. If you believe in God and you believe in a higher being, and that is you have no explanation for love. You can't quantify it. You can't quantify the science. It's much like the tired storyline in a Hollywood movie, Edwin, about a computer wanting to love someone. The new version of that would be Her, where the guy falls in love with his OS. You can't. Science has no explanation for things like love and faith. You can't quantify it, and I think that's important because that is a strong indication to me there is a God.
No, it is a strong indication that people need answers and need some kind of certainty. A real problem is that Ken Ham does think that science and religion should be taught in the same class. The creationists want science in the textbooks, and this is extremely dangerous. They've formed committees, they've gotten on boards of education, trying to put this mythology into science textbooks, and this is simply not correct.
One of the other things you hear, too, about this, Edwin, is if you look at it from a scientific perspective, and I don't want to get too geeky here on this thing like Sheldon, but the odds for a Big Bang to occur, if you talk about things like gravity and the formulas, if this formula were off by a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction, life as we know it based on science and not God, as you're saying, would not have existed here. We wouldn't be having this conversation. In the odds and circumstances for gravity and the earth and the world as we know it to have existed is so remote, mathematically speaking, it's more plausible to consider intelligent design, isn't it?
Oh, no, absolutely not. The fact that we don't know doesn't make creationism or intelligent design true. That's a big mythology. Too often people, when they can't explain something, says God did it. We don't know something, so what? Do you need to know how a car works to run it? It's a bizarre proposition.
Right. But how do we know that God didn't do it? You're assuming that, okay, God, we don't have proof. And I get it. You're saying as a scientist, we're jumping the conclusion for lack of scientific method that, well, it must be the hand of God. But, again, the other aspect of this thing is that, well, then what you're saying is that God didn't do it or not. I mean, if you don't have an answer as to why he didn't do it, it's awfully tough to believe that he doesn't exist or to have a hand in it. You know what I'm saying?
I see no reason whatsoever to think that just because one thing isn't so doesn't mean that another thing is so. The fact that someone cannot explain the details of how the universe works means that there is mystery in life, and there certainly is. Now, people who do not need the mythological underpinnings for their life are able to accept that. They're able to live with uncertainty. I don't know where the universe came from, and neither do you. And to say that it's all so complex, why a God had to have done it, well, do you feel that's more complex than a God who created everything out of nothing and who made humans out of dirt? That's the belief, that God made humans, male and female, out of dirt. And that's found to be more significant than the attempt to find out. The Bible sees the stars as merely decorations in the sky. It says God made the sun, and then he made the stars also. Mm-hmm. Again, these are early attempts by non-scientific people to understand the universe. The Greek scientists rejected this. Much of the Enlightenment of Europe And certainly when the United States was formed, it was formed as a secular, a godless nation. It's very clear that there was to be no combining of religion and government. Mm-hmm. And if you have state school boards or printing intelligent design literature, then you are intermingling government and religion.
Well, not really. I mean, if you can teach about other worldviews in a history class or a civics class or something, social studies, for example, that's to me that's fine, because that is a belief. You know, I would want my kid to know about other cultures as well as religions. So I don't see that as establishment. Hey, listen, I really appreciate it. We probably could talk for 4 hours. It's fascinating. Edwin Kagin with the Tri-State Freethinkers. He's also the National Legal Director of Atheist.org. And are you going to be at the event tonight, Edwin?
I certainly am, if you will, God willing, and it don't snow too heavy.
Well, that's the thing, right? We got this big ice storm, so...
That, by the way, doesn't mean I believe, because I think...
I understand. No, I appreciate it. It's just a fascinating discussion, I think. I enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. So
let's do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Have a great one. And be safe tonight. There you go. So we'll open the phones up at 513-749-7800, the big one, pound 700 AT&T. We have a battle royale brewing. I've got Scott the Atheist on line 2 in Georgia, who is a doctor at the Creation Museum, or with the Creation Museum on line 1. Plus everyone else wants to sound off on the great debate tonight as well. I'm like most people. I believe in both. I believe in the power of science. I believe the power of God. And I believe the two can coexist together. And there is some common ground here. Now, if you interpret the Bible literally, more likely than not, you're not going to believe in any science, evolution, Darwin, and all that other stuff as well. I think that, if I get surgery done, I praise science, but at the same time, it doesn't stop me from praying to God that everything goes okay. Get your thoughts in, and let's... All right, Sloan here, 700 WLW. We have a lot of people want to sound off on this particular topic, which would be the debate of the debate tonight. The Creation Museum, where science and God go head-to-head. We just had Edwin Kagin on from the Tri-State Freethinkers, which has angered a lot of God-fearing people. I don't know how you can come off and say that intelligent design, the teaching God, is child abuse. That's a pretty strong and exaggerated statement, isn't it? Man, look, I can believe that both coexist. I don't think too much one or the other, but I believe that certainly there's evolution, there's science, there's a scientific method, but that doesn't exclude God. I mean, to gloss over the whole notion, how would you then, as a man of science, explain love and faith in a scientific perspective and go, well, just because we haven't been able to prove it doesn't mean, well, it's something you can't quantify. How do you measure? How do you test love? You can't. You can't define it because it's different for every person. And if love and faith and a bunch of other emotions are different for every person, and by the way, exclusive to our species, how do you put that in scientific terms? Here's what I do, because the weather's getting bad. I want to check with Brian Combs and a few news headlines. And when we return, I promise we'll get to the calls. Scott the Atheist is there. George at the Creation Museum is there. Keith in Fairfield, and Joe and Mike, and room for you, too, at 513-749-7000. Explain to me, as a scientist, Scott the Atheist, love. We'll do that right after news on 700 WLW. Sloan here, 700 WLW. One eye on the phone lines, the other one on the white/clear death that is coming. Frankie M. updates us at 10 o'clock. A full background, everything you need to know about it, all right? Nothing but science, by the way, at 10. In the meantime, we're talking religious and science. Tonight, Creation Museum down in Kentucky. We're having the great debate between Genesis versus... right. It's that bad. Genesis versus evolution. The thing is this, the thing is going to go down tonight. I don't think you're going to change someone's mind. Someone who is a believer in God and Christ will look at this and go, my mind's changed. I no longer believe in God. And I think if you're an atheist, certainly what Ken Ham has to say isn't going to sway you either. And so it's more of an exercise, PR move, I think, maybe for both parties here. But, I think they can coexist. There's some wonderful books out there that discuss in great detail how the scientific method and evolution can coexist with the Bible. One of the questions I have for the atheists, and here's this guy, Edwin Kagin, nice guy, but he's very adamant in saying this. It's a myth, and it's a Bronze Age myth, and this thing. Well, you don't believe in God. Well, I'm not saying that. Well, if it's a myth, The definition of it is it doesn't exist. So I don't understand how. Now, you can't prove that it exists or not. That certainly would be scientific. But I contend I'm more of a scientist than either one of these guys because I'm open-minded enough to think, well, again, just because you can't prove it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Pretty simple premise for me. Scott, the atheist, a long time. How you been?
Getting better.
Good.
Where do we start? First, real quick, to answer love.
That's and for those just joining us, Scott, I posed this question. We didn't have because I went long with Edwin Kagin and I didn't have a chance, but he kind of dismissed the whole thing as well. Who knows? But to me, that seems to be an important facet. If you believe in God, if you believe in a higher being, that you can't quantify love, you can't quantify faith and things like that of the human mind because it's different for everyone. Everyone feels, expresses it differently. How do you define something like that in the scientific context?
I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to talk real briefly about child abuse because I have 2 children and I might be in danger of going to jail for child abuse if word of this gets out. And then I'll give you a quick little commentary on a conversation I had with Mr. Ham years and years ago about his little creation.
Well, I don't know if we have that kind of time, but quickly answer the love question, then I want to hear about the child abuse in that order. Go ahead.
Love comes from the most complicated machine on this planet called the human brain. Mm-hmm. It's love is more than likely created from things like dopamine and serotonin with chemical reactions in the brain and synapses between the parts. But here's more important. If love is such a special quality that your little friend Jesus or God or whatever gave to just human beings, then how come I see other animals such as killer whales, chimpanzees, lions, elephants. There are other animals with higher levels of thinking that also express the same exact emotions that we call love.
No, they don't.
I'm not talking about a salmon.
No, that's not even close. You're talking about the preservation of the species. You're talking about the nurturing that a mother provides her cubs.
Absolutely not.
And when they get older, that ceases to exist.
I'm not talking about a salmon that lays 1 million eggs in hopes that one of them will preserve the species. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about an orca that is stripped of its baby and goes into a severe depression when it's like, you know what, just have another kid. What's the big deal? But there are other animals out there similar to us that express the same exact type of mental and physical emotional abuse when their children are taken from them. So it's.
But again, it's the same child when it becomes a mature adult that they no longer identify with nor care about anymore, and they see it as competition. I mean, you're talking about the species trying to procreate to preserve the species, and there's an attachment between the mother and her cub. But when that cub becomes an adult, all of a sudden it becomes the enemy.
We're not exactly like
that. Doesn't happen. Well, but again, I mean, but that's why, again, God, and I'm talking, that's why I believe intelligent design exists. What's the child abuse thing you're talking about?
The child abuse thing is, and Willie actually accused me of child abuse years ago as well. I have 2 children. I have a 15-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I teach them, or it's not really teaching, it's just discussion about topics like this, about how, you know, my beliefs of Christianity and religion versus what I think as an atheist. And I've had people tell me, what's at stake here? If these children of mine are brainwashed, let's say, at their young age right now, and they grow up not thinking that, their eternal souls are going to burn in hell for infinity. I mean, that is extremely, very, very serious, I would imagine. Mm-hmm. If Christianity, if these Christians out there really, truly, honestly believe in what they speak, which means they probably would have been watching a religious program during the Super Bowl Sunday, which I doubt that. But if they really, truly were Christians, they would see this as this would be no different than if somebody was standing out in Fountain Square whipping the heck out of a kid or punching him in the face or dumping hot water on him or something like that. It's obvious. No,
that's pretty much, that's a pretty extreme example. You're saying it's child abuse because you teach your kid not to believe in God?
If I'm a Christian and I see a father teaching his children that God is not real, that the story of Christ is not real,
right.
There is no heaven and hell, it's more important that you treat your fellow man with compassion and respect.
Right.
That's priority number one, not your love for Jesus Christ.
I don't understand, but I don't understand how that's child abuse.
it's child abuse in the same way as if I teach my kid that there's these 72 virgins waiting for me, and you need to.
No, it's not. Yeah. Here's the problem. Guys like Scott the atheist, or the people he's talking about. You're talking about the extreme fringes of it. I think most people kind of go, yeah, science, religion, I get it. There's both. But here's the real danger. Okay, here's the thing, and I think this is more. I think there's a backlash, and I get it, by atheists towards religion in government and in school and in public school and everything else. And I think, okay, I don't think it's child abuse if you teach your kid there's no God or there's no Easter Bunny or Santa. That's up to you. You're protected under the Constitution. I will defend that. As a Christian, as someone who's a Catholic, I will defend that. What's right for me isn't right for you. That's what this whole debate should be about. It should be about, back to that notion, which I think is the cornerstone of the Constitution, freedom of association. But not only that, more importantly, it's freedom to live your life as long as you're not infringing on other people. And up until this point, until I hear from Scott, I see mostly religious people pushing this on people who don't want to believe. I got a great example. We have an election coming up. Well, we always have an election coming up, but got a campaign flyer for someone who's canvassing my neighborhood, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. If you want the atheists to go away, I think what you have to do is start electing people to office who are going to be good leaders for all people, not just trying to get elected because they believe in the Bible. I'll explain coming up next. 700 WL. This is Scott Sloan Show, 700 WLW, in the debate tonight. Creation Museum, Ken Ham and Bill Nye the Science Guy. Evolution versus Genesis. Not Phil Collins and Mike Rutherford, rather, but the book of. And real quick here, Georgia, you must be somebody big, Georgia, and forgive me for not knowing who you are, but we had like 5 people, Betty said, called and said, you should get Georgia on from the Creation Museum.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm Georgia Purdom, and I have a Ph.D. in molecular genetics from Ohio State University.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and I am a researcher and speaker and writer for Answers in Genesis and the Creation Museum.
All right, how does Genesis, now do you interpret the book of Genesis literally?
Yes, I do.
How do you reconcile that with being a scientist?
Well, there's no problem with that, because what we read in God's Word is what we see in God's world. I mean, it's reflective of that. For example, we see God says that He created animals according to their kind, and that's exactly what we see in the world today. Animals reproduce after their kind. We don't have one animal or any kind of mechanism for an animal to evolve into something else. So it's absolutely consistent with what we observe in the world.
How do you get past that 6,000 years thing? I mean, clearly we know that the world goes back much longer than that.
Well, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
But you're a scientist. I thought scientists kind of concur that that's the case.
They do. And so...
wait a minute now.
Okay, well, let me explain. So we know from Scripture that when we look at the genealogies, especially those in Genesis chapter 5 and 11, and others, that there's only about 6,000 years from the beginning of the universe, the beginning of time, until today. And a lot of people would say, well, radiometric dating methods show that the world is billions of years old. But we have to remember something about radiometric dating methods. They're all based on assumptions about the past. And if any of those assumptions are wrong, then the date that they're going to give is wrong. People were not there. They don't know. They're making guesses and then using those to figure out the dates.
But that's been accepted as a scientific measurement principle, much like a scale would be. But if it's completely off, why are they still using it?
Well, because, again, they want to promote a certain agenda that God does not exist, that He's not real, so that they can continue in a world in which they are not responsible
but not all
to God.
But not all scientists are atheists, though. So there's
true.
I don't know if there's an equal amount between each, but if scientists of both religious doctrine like yours or individuals who are atheists or agnostic agree that method of dating is acceptable practice, then why are we having this debate?
Well, because unfortunately, there are even Christians who have decided that God's word is not true, and they've decided to take man's ideas about the past as precedence over that, and saying, well, we can make these guesses about the past, it's okay, and it'll work out, but it doesn't, and that's the problem with it. They're still deciding that they know more about the past than what God's word says, and so that's the central problem with
the
it.
other aspect I have too of the atheists and the scientists versus versus the religious scientists, is that science assumes God is almost like you said with the dating system, is contained within our measurable parameters. But, if you read the Bible, you know that God is outside of time and space and therefore outside the scope of science. So it's something that science can't even measure.
Well, but he created time for our purposes.
But he operates outside that, is what I'm saying. And so
Absolutely.
If we measure it in our terms, you can't. That's why you can't quantify God or a higher being.
Right, and we're not trying to. Right, I absolutely agree with that.
Right. So what time is this? What time is the debate tonight? Do you know?
The debate is 7 p.m.
7
and they can go to debatelive.org to watch it live web streamed from
If
our
this thing
website.
gets canceled because of an ice storm, is that science or the hand of God?
It's not getting canceled. We're going forward.
You're going forward. Is Bill Nye and Ken Ham, are they both on campus right now?
No, but Ken Ham is, but not Bill Nye. He'll be
God
here.
may be trying to prevent Bill Nye from coming then.
Oh, I don't think
Maybe this
so.
is the hand of God trying to tell him something.
We want to make sure that the world really hears this and understands that that we when we start with God's word, it is not in contradiction with what we see in this world, and that creation and science are completely compatible with one another.
George, I appreciate you calling and hanging on. Thanks so much, and good luck tonight in the debate.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, there you go. That's Georgia. She's the big one down there. So, real quick here before I get to. Well, let me get traffic and weather out of the way here. I don't want to jack you up on... Sports headlines brought to you by Wendy's. Congrats to the Cats. They wake up this morning in both the AP and USA Today college basketball polls as the 7th best team in the country on their way up. Pitchers and catchers reporting 1 week from Friday. They'll talk about a Holy Grail Banks and Hot Stove League 6:05 tonight on the big one. Joey Votto in with Lance at 7 o'clock tonight on Sports Talk. And so in this battle between God and science, here's the thing that, and I agree with the atheists on this one too, is, you want to... When I elect you, or you want me to elect you, could you stop telling me how righteous you are, how God... you know what? It's different for everyone. Okay? When I get a circular from, I don't know, Mary Jo Kubicki, voted running for rep, left us on my door. Stand and fight for our values. And it's just so damn predictable. The Republican conservative movement is America's last hope. If we don't stand or fight for freedom, no one will. Which is, this whole end of every election is the most important one of our age, and America hangs in the balance. No, it's marketing. It's like Home Shopping Network. That's why they give you a clock to buy that stupid tchotchke or purse that's on there. Well, when it's gone, it's sense of urgency. There's no urgency. The union will survive, regardless who's in charge. Always has, always will. Get government off our backs. It's about, reining in big government. But then on the same page, it talks about reclaiming our rights. Rights defined in the Constitution, our rights and freedoms come from God. No, they come from the Constitution. You may think they're based on God and godly teachings, and certainly there's a hand in that, but it's pretty clear, the free exercise clause. You don't have to believe in God to be an American. Most of us do, but many don't. And when you talk about, defender of marriage is defined by God, well, how is that government getting out of our lives? More crap. You run a candidate that says, listen, I don't care what you do, as long as you don't bother me. I want to fix what's real, the financial problems and other things in this country. And quit pitching me on how good and God-fearing you are, please. Thank you. Home of the Reds, 700 WLW Cincinnati.